I guess I had to do something for you.
Wine bloggers
Once I did
and wine
retire,
influencers.
Went into the world of wine. I'm also the owner of the Minority Wine Report, just a blog site that try to give as much information as possible. But we have a great panel here today, 3 experts in the field of blogging and also social media. So if you leave here today and you don't think you had all the answers to the questions you're looking for, you should ask these guys because they can give you as much information as you probably need to be successful either in social media or blogging. Okay, so the first gentleman on the panel is Mr. James Forsythe. He's with Delectable. He's a renowned critic and writer, travels the world, visiting major viticulture regions, meeting with winemakers and tasting wines to bring readers timely, in-depth content on all things wine. From the most iconic estates and up-and-coming producers, his readers can search and archive over 200,000 tasting notes, explore thousands of articles, and watch hundreds of videos, interviews with winemakers. The app, the Venice app, enables wine lovers to take photos of labels to pull up expert tasting notes on the go and link them to relevant real-time realtors listings. And that's James Forsythe. And our next gentleman is Michael Wayne Bickler.
Hey, you got it right.
Got it right. Bozak Communication. He is the president, a leading marketing communication company for the world of beverage, food, and travel. Before following his heart to wine country, he followed his head to Silicon Valley and spent 8 fast-paced years in communications, but finally concluded it wasn't for him. Armed with a live-to-eat model and an evident passion for wine, Mike entered Bozak Life in 2004 and became the agency's president in 2016. Among his many achievements, Mike holds a WSET Level 4 diploma in wine and spirit, and WSET Level 3 award in sake. That's pretty interesting. Okay. In addition, he is a certified educator for CWE and WineSet, WSET. And our final panelist is Tom. Give me a second here. I have a different place for his bio. Tom Mork began his career as a wine marketer and publicist in 1990. In 1994, he opened his own consultant, Warp Communications, which continues to serve small and medium-sized wineries and wine-related companies with media, communication, and marketing services. He began writing what you guys probably are familiar with is The Fermentation, the daily wine blog in 2004. He has since published more than 3,200 posts on issues of wine, politics, wine media, the wine industry, blogging, and marketing, and the culture of wine. An advocate of wine blogging, Mark helped launch the first Wine Bloggers Conference in 2008. And he is the founder of American Wine Blog Award. Tom is very involved working to reform direct-to-consumer landscape via lobbying and litigation. He lives in Napa with his wife and son. So this is your panel today, and my first question is going to be to Tom, because he seems to maybe have invented the wine blogging, at least had a little say-so in it. I would like him to tell us the state of wine blogging in 2004 and how it has progressed up until the present day. Tom.
Thank you, Thaddeus. So in 2004, I looked around and there were about 10 wine blogs worldwide. I'm not even sure we were calling them wine blogs at the time. But I thought everyone needed to know what I had to say. And there were some platforms out there that allowed me to say it pretty inexpensively and pretty easily. And so I started the blog. After 2004 through 2006 and 7, wine blogging exploded in general. And it was a unique and it was a novelty, and a lot of people were talking about blogging, not just in the wine industry, but in every different industry, and how it might disrupt different media, and it was interesting to watch what the response was among the professional wine writing community to blogging. In general, I think they thought it was pretty cute that there were some new folks who wanted to talk. There were a lot of other people who thought that these guys don't know what they're talking about. And so there was an interesting divide, I think, between bloggers and the professional wine writing community, which doesn't, I think, exist today anymore. The really key thing, though, about those early years and about blogging was that it allowed all these voices to very inexpensively all of a sudden compete with the bigger voices in the same playground. Very inexpensive to jump on Blogger and start a blog. So all of a sudden people are reading Alder Yarrow or myself or some other people. At the same time they're reading the New York Times and Eric Asimov and a variety of, and the Wine Spectator and the Wine Enthusiast. And for someone like myself, it was very empowering. It was very empowering for other wine bloggers also. And so it continued to expand and expand and expand. And I think wine blogging hit its peak around 2009, 2010, at least the interest in wine blogging and seeing wine blogs as a novelty. Since then, and today particularly, wine bloggers are part of the wine media and they are wine writers. I just got done doing a survey of wine writers. It's the fourth one I've done since 1994. I made no distinction whatsoever when I surveyed different writers about whether or not they're bloggers or whether or not they write for the New York Times or whether or not they write for a newspaper. Because I think we are all now members of the wine media. And I think that the professional wine media, those people who get paid on a regular basis to do it, I think they would agree. So I think that the biggest difference between now and back in the early 2000s is that we have arrived. We are members of the wine media, and I think everyone agrees.
I do like that analogy, and if you have any questions, you can just raise your hand and you can be heard on what Tom just was speaking of. Any questions? All right, we'll go to the next panel. The next question is for Michael here. Michael, what social media platform do you think are most important in the wine world? I know that's a broad.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the hard question. I'm going to look at this in terms of, I'm going to take a slightly different approach to your question, and that is how do we look at social media in terms of when we're talking about this overall arching idea of blogging? And that is that, to me, social media is not an alternative to blogging, and I think for a long time that's been viewed to be the case. I view most social media as channels. They're channels to communicate with your audience, and they're a way for you to, in turn, extend your reach to your target audience. If you look at yourself as bloggers, as content creators, and you're creating content, whether that is written, whether that is video, whether that is voice, or some other medium, social media is a way for you to reach your audience in another way with the content that you've created. So in terms of which is most important, it really depends on what your overall goals are as a blogger and who your audience is. So if your audience is perhaps skewing a little on the older side and is more kind of lifestyle driven, then perhaps Facebook is the place for you. If your audience is more image driven and they speak in pictures and video, then perhaps Instagram is more important to you. If they're more interested in sort of this kind of one-on-one engagement where you have an ongoing conversation, then perhaps Twitter is the place to be, right? So it really depends on what your ultimate goals are, who you're trying to reach, and then choosing the channel that works for you. Frankly, I think you should be using all three and using them in different ways because you can reach different audiences in all three.
Okay, very good. Thank you. The next question will be for James Forsythe. How important are non-traditional mediums such as different apps in the wine world?
Well, I mean, this is a great question. Obviously, one which, given my role at Delectable, I'm hopefully quite well placed to answer. Let me first take a really quick detour, which is to, sort of clarify a little bit on the introduction side, because I'm not a wine critic, and although on the Vinous side we do have several of the world's most respected and influential wine critics. So, for example, the gentleman who covers the wines of Walla Walla, for us it's Stephen Tanza, Antonio Galoni does Napa and parts of Italy, Neil Martin, Bordeaux, etc. And Delectable, which wasn't really covered in the intro, is a little bit like the Instagram for wine. Probably most people here are familiar with either Delectable or Vivino, which is now increasingly a sort of a marketplace for wine rather than a social media focused app, which is what Delectable is. And so Delectable has about 10 million or so user reviews, hundreds of thousands of people who very regularly snap shots of their wine, review them, rate them if they want to, they don't need to leave a score, and then share that with their friends. And so, I think one of the key things here, though, is really to consider what is your use case and who's your audience. Because one of the ways I think of considering apps just generally, rather than just necessarily wine apps or social media apps, is to think of them sort of in terms of being either social in nature or utility in nature. And it is absolutely reasonable for you to be a blogger who has an intended audience of one person, and that's really yourself. A sort of wine logger, if you will. Somebody who is entirely focused on the sort of purely utility aspect of a blog in order to be able to create sort of a framework for some of the thinking that you're doing, or indeed on the sort of wine reviewing side, literally a way of just tracking what you've had. In the last year or so, I think I've tasted maybe 2,000 wines or so, and there's no way I would be able to remember all of them, but I use Delectable a lot for that. In terms of the social aspect of these niche apps, or I should say niche, I'm sort of becoming increasingly American, so is a little bit like, you're talking to a room full of people, and if you're talking to something, if you're on something like Instagram, the room is massive, but it's also very crowded, and so even if you have, let's say a few hundred followers on Instagram, you're still yelling across an enormous room where there's an awful lot of other buzz going on. Something like Delectable is obviously, many, many times smaller than Instagram, but it is entirely focused such that the audience there are people who are massively interested in what you have to say. And then indeed the style of posts can change an awful lot compared to what works on other social platforms to Delectable. So for example, if you started writing a tasting note or a review or a photo of every single wine that you've tried on Instagram, that would be frustrating noise for all of those people who follow you. Whereas on Delectable, that's entirely what you're meant to be doing. People want to see that tiny little snippet of all of your wine experiences. So I think it's sort of horses for courses. It's it's know your audience and know your use case. And Delectable and others, Seller Tracker, for example, in various different ways, and many others have a purpose.
Hey Tom, James, I'm gonna have a quick follow-up to that. Do you see any value in going live either on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter in reviewing wines, and would you consider that something of value?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Instagram stories have become really popular, and I started one today on the Delectable account to cover this conference, and there are some writers / bloggers who do it pretty well, but it's tricky because if you go if you do something like Instagram Live or Facebook Live, that's great, but then sometimes you look at the viewing statistics attached to that, and it's like 3 people have looked at your account or are following this, and so what is the point to some extent? It's a lot. I think it looks a lot better on paper than it really is at the moment. I just don't think at the moment that many people are tuning in to look at sort of fairly loosely constructed live content at the moment, with the possibility of a very small handful of exceptions. I mean, maybe others disagree, but that's just what I'm observing right now.
I'm not going to disagree, but Delectable is an excellent way for you to review your wines that you've tasted. Because not everybody's going to want to come to a blog to read wine reviews. And to me, frankly, I don't want to do that, and I think that probably a lot of you probably don't want to do that either, right? So to me, a blog is the modern day blog is a way for you to tell stories, right? And telling a good story is going to be much more compelling. You're going to get much more readership and, frankly, much more engagement from your readers if you're telling a good tale. And stuff like wine reviews, not so much. But what you can do is you can tie back to Delectable from your blog, with the wine review. Say like you're talking about a particular winery and you're giving them a profile and you're talking about all the cool stuff that they're doing, and then you can say, here, if to read my reviews on these wines, you can go to Delectable or Vivino or our Cellar Tracker. All great tools as well.
And of course, the other way around applies, because if you did do that in Delectable, you'd obviously link in your profile back to your blogs, and so there are thousands of bloggers who do exactly that, and I think it's a way that they can sort of channel a lot of attention. It's quite easy to become a fairly prominent figure in a small pond, in a way that if people are trying to make a splash on something like Twitter, it would be much, much more difficult to do.
Sorry, I keep having thoughts about what we're talking about here, and just to get really nerdy for a second and talk about a little bit about SEO, which is a topic that I'm sure all of you are often thinking about. But one of the things that increases your search rating is going to be inbound links, and those inbound links, if you think about Delectable and the audience that's there, that's one channel. Your social media channels are also ways for you to get that kind of cross internet traffic.
Okay, next question for Tom. If I'm a young blogger starting out today, would you recommend that I start a blog or work through social media channels or both?
Well, clearly, social media channels and blogging are 2 different things altogether. You probably already have a social media account, even if you're not a blogger. Everyone has a social media account. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, whatever. But if you're inclined to let other people know what you're thinking, and if you're inclined to want to influence other people where it comes to wine, if you want to try to move the needle, then I think a blog is a really great choice. I'm trying to figure out if there's another choice. Of course there's another choice. You could be a video blogger or you could be a podcaster. But the ease of entry into wine blogging right now, it's just ridiculous. I mean, anyone can start a blog literally within 5 minutes. But before you do, you probably want to decide what it is you're going to do with that blog. Are you going to review wines? Are you going to be the champion of Walla Walla or Washington State? Are you going to try to speak to the various strange laws that exist around the country with regard to wine and wine shipping and wine regulation? Are you going to cover celebrity wine? I got to tell you, by the way, no one's ever started this blog, and somebody should. Why isn't anybody covering what celebrities drink? I mean, if you want to get a following immediately that's gigantic, just tell people what Johnny Depp is drinking. Tell people what's being served in Hollywood. No one's ever done that. I can't figure out why. If you want an immediate audience of hundreds of thousands, that's how you do it. But everyone in here has agreed that they want to start a blog and they want to talk to people about wine and they want to try to influence them. And everyone here has demonstrated they have a pretty healthy ego. They've all come to the conclusion that other people need to read what they have to say, and that's a good thing. So I guess my advice would be stick to the platform that you think best expresses your opinion, whether it's video or podcasting or writing in general. Also, with regard to the apps, if I had a blog in which I occasionally reviewed wines or frequently reviewed wines, or if I tasted a lot of wines on a regular basis, I can't imagine why I wouldn't always be posting my reviews on either Delectable or Vivino or Cellar Tracker. It's a source of authority once you start to build up the number of reviews there and people start to respond to you and people start to follow you. So if you're not doing that, if you haven't chosen a platform or a combination of platforms at which to house your wine reviews, you should probably start now.
And just a quick follow-up, real quick. What about a part-time blogger that has limited time? Any recommendations for them?
Would recommend that you close down your blog. Yeah, there's no such thing as a part-time blogger, because if you expect to build an audience and someone comes and they read your review, they read your story about the marvels of Walla Walla and its Syrah, and then they come back the next week, well, you haven't posted anything. And then they come back maybe the next week somehow and you still haven't posted anything. And then somehow they get there 2 months later and they see that dreaded post that reads like this: I haven't been blogging lately, so I just click, I'm gone. If you're going to blog, I think you have to commit to it, and you have to commit to it in a serious way.
And how often do you think a serious blogger should post on their blog? How often?
A serious blogger?
I mean, if you're in the blogging game, how often should...
If you're not posting at least once a week, you're letting your audience down.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah, probably should be doing more. And if you're not doing more, are you really interested in the subject?
Yeah. Good point.
Just to reinforce what Tom has said, I used to have a blog. I used to have a wine blog. And I couldn't commit to it. Right, I just had too many other commitments that took up my time, so I decided to shut it down. To go back to whether you start a blog or not, I'm going to slightly disagree with Tom in this way, and that is that you don't have to pick one. Right, you don't have to pick podcasting or blogging or video blogging. Right, you can actually use a combination of those. In fact, if you do, your rankings will be higher in Google, and your audience will be more engaged because they will have multiple ways of actually consuming the content that you are creating. So if you have a podcast, you should also include a blog with each podcast episode that you put out. Whether that's a transcript of what the podcast is about, or whether it's some additional information, some additional links that they can go find more information on what the blog is about. But this gives you, again, multiple channels. You gotta start looking at yourselves as, and this is going back to where we're talking about the blogger, the writer, and the influencer, right? And we can talk about what those different things are, but when we're talking about what an influencer is, they can be a blogger and a podcaster. They can be outside of that area, but if I was to start one today, in fact, I am going to be starting a new business blog for my company. But I'm also going to use those multiple channels. I'm going to do multiple things, not just writing, because not everybody wants to just consume writing, and you'll hit a broader audience if you're using multiple ways of presenting your content.
Really quickly though, on that very point, is just don't underestimate the amount of work some of the stuff requires. Particularly with podcasts, you think, oh, it's easy, I'll just talk in a microphone for a little bit of time. With podcasts, low production value comes across really, really clearly, and so I wouldn't do anything half-hearted. If you want to do a podcast, make sure that it's really quite good. Likewise,
or a blog. I mean, if you're going to do it right. Anything worth doing is worth doing right.
Yeah, and I think that the recency point is so key. I mean, there's so many things that, when we spend our time looking across all the various media platforms that we have among Vinous and Delectable, one of the key things that we've seen is that, if ever we have sort of things like a slowdown in servers by a handful of seconds, bounce rates go through the roof. If we have a page that doesn't look that particularly updated for a while, bounce rates go through the roof, even though it's going to link to other really useful stuff. You just have to at least give the appearance that there's some polish on the apple, even if beneath it it's been rather neglected and looks a little bit rotten. In which case, in our cases, none of that's true. They're polished and beautifully crisp throughout, to continue this apple analogy. But nevertheless, I think the point's quite clear.
Okay, I'll address this question to all three of you guys, because it's another part of why we're here today, talking about the influencers in the social media world, for instance, like Kim Kardashian and people like that. You guys have a feeling on that, and also how maybe someone here can probably not to that level, but also be influenced in a sense.
I don't have any feelings about Kim Kardashian.
Thank you. Me neither.
Other than to say, it'd be very nice, Kim, if you tweeted about some of my clients. It would be very nice if you advocated for retailer to consumer shipping. But beyond that, not too interested in her. With regard to influencers and whatnot, I think we should all be clear. All bloggers are influencers, all influencers are not bloggers. So, and all writers are influencers to one degree or another. You know, I was thinking about it the other day. I was trying to come across a person who possessed neither a blog or a podcast or a video blog, who was also a wine influencer, somebody who didn't write video, someone who just had a Twitter account, a really good, strong Twitter. I can't come up with one. Is there one? And yet there are a lot of influencers out there who don't necessarily have a blog and don't have any other means of communicating with people other than they have a huge, gigantic Twitter audiences. And they're almost always celebrated people or business people or celebrities of one sort or another. So I don't think we have very many, if any, wine influencers who don't also have another outlet. And I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you become an influencer without another vehicle. I'd like to see it if it's out there. And I also want to reiterate, if she's listening, Kim Kardashian, I'd like you to tweet about my clients and my causes.
So earlier this year, LeBron James posted on his Instagram account a lineup of a bunch of really high-end Napa wines and a handful of grain wines and a couple of other things. And the comment was really interesting. He said something along the lines of, an amazing lineup of wine, and then something like, please don't talk to me about wine if you don't really know about wine, because you don't know about wine. Which is like, okay, fine. But what he did do, however, is break down some of the barriers, because I'm sure that a lot of his audience are massively intimidated about wine, probably not really sort of into their wines at all. And that's one of the purposes I think that some of these people with amazing reaches can do, is to do what I think every single person here is excited about, which is to tell people in various different ways why they're passionate about this subject of wine. And if you if that's sort of the top LeBron James type level with his tens of millions of followers on Instagram, nevertheless the influence that there is such a thing as micro influencers on Instagram as well, and they're increasingly getting paid a couple $100 for a quick post on aggregate. It's a bit of a weird, murky world though, because if you did go down that route to potentially monetize the sort of micro influence level, then you're often posting about wines that you may not actually like or be passionate about. There's going to be a lot of Yellowtail, that sort of thing, who've got big marketing budgets, which might be of concern.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that's something I wanted to talk about. Okay, so I think there's when we're talking about the wine influencer, I think there's a distinction, because there are a lot of paid influencers out there, right? So you have to look at yourself and say, okay, am I a journalist or am I a business? Okay, if you are a journalist, the way that you get paid is through advertising, right? Or you don't get paid.
Or subscriptions in our case.
Or subscription, yeah, sorry, right. If it's Venice, it's subscriptions, right? If you are a business person, you get paid by clients, right? So a paid influencer is a business, and that basically is somebody who's taking money from a company to then promote their products through their channels. So they're basically selling their channel to the company, okay? That's a legitimate business, and there's plenty of people out there who do that, and they are successful at it. Few of them are really wine focused. Most of them are going to be like lifestyle type focused. Like they might be a travel influencer or a kind of lifestyle influencer. They'll write about everything from consumer packaged goods to restaurants to wine to everything. They're really mercenary in that regard because again they're running a business. So as wine bloggers or influencers, you need to determine for yourselves is why are you doing this, right? If you are in this to make money, but you're not a journalist, and or you're not an enthusiast, you're running a business. So you need to make a choice as to how you want to present yourselves, okay? And don't muddy the waters by trying to have a foot in both places, because it will absolutely affect your credibility if you are a business and running it as an influencer, whether people view you as a journalist, right?
Yeah, just to sort of round the circle, I think this particularly pertinent to this question because someone like Kim Kardashian or the rest of the Kardashian-Jenner clan, they're the business side because they are typically getting paid, up to $500,000 to post particular products, whereas the LeBron James example was that classic enthusiast, which is about passion and interest, and is a very, very different thing.
Okay, so I was just doing a little research online, and they in 2016 they did a survey, and they surveyed 375 U.S. wineries, and 87% of the wineries that surveyed said that their sales was up 30%, and they contributed social media to those sales. So blogging, social media is not dead. Just got to probably do a better job at it, and blog a little bit more often. All right, one more question for the panel here, and this has to do with the Wine Bloggers Conference in a sense. They've been debating, is Wine Bloggers Conference still the correct name to use, or maybe modified a little bit? What do you guys think?
Michael wants to ask the audience, which I think is always a very bad idea.
We need to wake the audience up anyway. So.
I will say this, I don't think it's the right name anymore. Yes, you're all, well, I suppose most of you are bloggers, but to go back to Michael's point, it's not that you're necessarily journalists. You may be a journalist, you may be a commentator, you may be a critic, but you're also a publisher. And I think that's one of the mindsets you have to keep front and center. So is the Wine Bloggers Conference appropriately named? It's probably not. It probably should be the Wine Media Conference, which would include all of us in this room. It would include clearly the podcasters and the videographers, but I think it would also include people who get paid to write about wine. It would include wine writers. If you don't think you're a wine writer, you are. The wine writers who get paid, they think you're a writer, they think they're competing with you, and they think that you're pulling down their salaries too. And you are, by the way. So I think it's inappropriately named right now. It was correct in the past, though.
So when you first started blogging, did you think you were a blogger or were you a writer?
I thought I was an egomaniac. Careful. I think very quickly I realized what I was doing was blogging, because I was hardly the first blogger. There were a lot of people out there who were blogging, and there was some talk about blogging as this rising medium, but it very quickly took off, and it snowballed, and all of a sudden, who were all the bloggers? And bloggers are on Time Magazine and whatnot. So I quickly knew that I was a blogger, and I knew also that I was not a professional wine writer also. However, today I break stories that other writers don't, and I make salient comments on issues that other writers don't, but probably should. So I think it's changed in that regard. I think we're all part of the wine media.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if it wasn't such an unsexy word, it was almost like wine informers in a sense, because the cool thing about blogs, which is really different to a lot of other things, is that everyone seems to have a slightly different angle, whether it's, wine and history, or wine and green carrots, and, just random stuff. But there's a place for all of that in a way. And content sells, and to the point earlier about attributing an increase of sales to social media, it's probably just generally the availability of information. We've got this pretty neat product in a bunch of Whole Foods where you can sort of go through the inventory of the store and then see what people have said about it. And if there's a sort of $7 wine and someone says, it's not the best wine in the world, but it's great for Tuesday night, and sometimes you just need an oaky Chardonnay. Great, done, brilliant. You've just helped facilitate some other people make a decision that otherwise they wouldn't have done so. And I think that's sort of where, blogging has a really unique place, is just to fill in those gaps of really interesting, different and diverse areas that a lot of the other sort of traditional media doesn't necessarily have a space for.
Where do we begin with the red checkmark means and the delectable?
That makes you an influencer.
Right. So, back to the influencer point, and that is that you don't actually have to be a blogger or a writer or a journalist or any of these things to be an influencer in wine, because there are plenty of other people out there like master sommeliers in general, people who work in the business who are regularly reviewing, posting about wines, etc. So, again, kind of looking back at like what this whole thing should be called, I think we should include some of those people here as well, because they'd offer a lot of insights to you as writers, because they'd be opportunities for you to interview people and talk to them about what it is that drives them to be so interested in wine and their audiences, which is completely different from ours.
I just want to say, if anyone was thinking about it, I just registered wineandgreencarrots.com. So it's off the market, sorry.
Okay, let's get a little audience participation. Someone's got to have a question for these guys. Okay. Hey, Amber, how you doing?
Okay, guys. So this is a very frustrating thing for me. It's been said to me a lot about numbers. The PR agents, they want numbers for you to play. We're actually very blessed because we're in Napa, so we get a lot of PR agents that reach out to us for hospitality and other things. But what's happening is that people that PR agents and whatever that don't know us, they're asking us for, what are your numbers? What are your this? What are your analytics? They won't even talk to you unless they have that information. They won't go to your site. You have to present them with a press kit. So while you guys are saying, only be on Twitter and Instagram and whatever, I'm being told that you need to be on all the platforms, and they really look at those numbers, and you have to be an influencer. So I work my blog. I'm working 12, 14 hours a day to do that, to get those numbers up. People like our writing, the PR agents that we work for, like Balzac, like what we're doing, and they give us a lot of work. But a very frustrating situation to try and be on all these platforms and have your numbers and be in the vineyards and be able to write and take great photographs and all the things that you need for engagement. And these young bloggers who are just coming up, they don't know what's involved. That's my question to you is, what do you think? How many platforms are you going to have to be on?
I don't think we have enough time for me to answer that.
Let's give a 2-minute answer.
Because that puts me right up on my soapbox, and that's a hot button issue with me. I will say that if a PR person is not reading your blog, they are freaking lazy. Okay, so I cannot condone that behavior, because frankly, just don't work with them. Okay, I mean, unless it's like something really you want to work on. First of all, you can work on it independently without their input. I mean, that's the thing. It's like a PR person who doesn't actually provide you with what you want is stupid, right? Because they have an opportunity to actually help you tailor what the story is, and if they don't do that, then they get what they get, right? Numbers are one of those things where it's easy for. It's lazy. It's the same reason you have, the 100-point scores. It's like it's like the distributor rep will tell you, well, if you had 91 points, I'd carry your wine, right? Because they don't actually care about what the wine is. All I care about is some vanity metric that they can use to prove that the wine's worth selling. So it's the same thing with that. Now, that said, you need to prove that you are worthy of attention from PR people. Absolutely. You have, because through the quality of your content and through the quality of your work, you prove to them this is somebody that we should approach and or we should work with, right? But if you, as bloggers, aren't putting the work in and making sure that you are providing quality to the people you're talking to, then that's on you, right? So if you're just in this for free wine, just get out. Because it's not going to work out for you, right? And there's plenty of those out there. We all know them, right? We all know those people who show up to all these events that we put on. They say we're a blogger, and all they do is they get themselves drunk, and then they don't write a stitch of content, right? So again, it really is on to you to basically say, okay, don't say, well, if they say, what are your numbers? Don't give them the numbers if that's not what you're about. You basically say, totally understand where you're coming from with wanting to have those numbers. Here is why we want to talk to you, because we want to do this piece. And if you read our blog, you will see the quality of our content, and you can talk to people within the industry that we are worthy of your attention. If that is not good enough for you, fine, I'll go somewhere else, right? So really it comes down to that.
More questions back there? Okay.
I could just
one time while I'm walking.
Just to make you feel better, there have been writers, professional writers, that get paid on a regular basis who were really nothing but drunks coming to our events. So it's not just bloggers, who fall into that category. I've known a number of writers who they're shitty writers, but somehow they have a job and they come and they drink. To your other point, though, numbers are just one way in which we evaluate a blog. So I'm also a publicist, and when I come across a new blog, I want to know how many people are reading it, what's their Twitter following, what's their Instagram following, et cetera, et cetera. But also, do they write well? Do they write on a regular basis? Do they seem to have a number of comments, on each of their posts? Numbers are hardly the most important variable.
And again, if that's the only thing they care about, then it's lazy.
I would tend to agree with that, because I, like some of you, also lead a double life. I was full-time PR, and I left and I do PR, but I also started a blog. Part of the reason I left the full-time job was so I could start a blog, because it would have been a clear conflict otherwise, because I worked for a wine company. And I would agree with everything that you said. I get so many pitches now, which is the freakiest thing ever, because I'm on both sides of the fence. But the companies that do demand those numbers, you have to think about what kind of companies are those. Those are likely the big, maybe publicly held, huge corporate-based companies that are, somebody at that company is going to have to report to a big boss who wants to know. And honestly, I've been guilty of like making up a number, because if I want to work with a blogger, I see the passion, I see the authenticity. I also want to help that blogger build up their following and build up their content. So I would often, for internal purposes, I would just like make up a number just to satisfy somebody internally as my boss. So I'm not saying lie or make up things, but I'm saying PR people sometimes do that, and I think they should if they want to work with bloggers to help cultivate those relationships and that great content that's going to ultimately grow.
I guess there wasn't a necessary was that a question or statement? Okay. If you guys want to respond, you can go ahead.
Well, I just really sort of basic point on this very subject, which is, much like George Orwell's pigs, numbers are made equal, some more equal than others, in that if you've got an audience of, let's say, 200 people, so basically a tiny audience, but that 200 people was, let's say, 200 people in this room, that's a pretty freaking unbelievably great audience. But if your audience is, sort of 200 people who have no real interest in wine, then, that's less good audience. A friend of mine, was dating an extremely famous sports person up until relatively recently, and I said to him, you must really get her to post about Vinous Intellectual. And his reply was, I didn't realize that your target audience was 13-year-old girls. Because she was an ice skater, and apparently that's who follows her almost entirely. And so that's a completely irrelevant audience, although it's massive. So I would say one of the angles which I would encourage everybody to do if they are forced to give numbers is to talk about the relevancy of the audience, because that's a really profound thing. And that's one of the reasons why things like Delectable is good, because it's a very relevant audience, whereas something like Instagram is shouting to a room full of people who just don't care sometimes.
Yeah, to that same point, I care more about engagement than I do about readership or numbers, right? So I want to know that you're really engaged with your audience. And it doesn't have to be on your blog, right? Because a lot of times that engagement happens, to Tom's point for our conversation leading up to this conversation, is that when he first started out, all the comments, all the engagement happened on his blog, and now none of it does, or very little of it does. Less and less. And all that engagement is moving more towards other channels of like social. So if you can show to somebody saying, here's my, it's about engagement, and all the people who engage with me in other channels, that is proving your influence, right? It's going back to blogging versus influencing, right?
Right here.
Thank you. So I wanted you to talk or comment about, I feel like it seems like there's a decline in the amount of people who read blogs on a regular basis. I don't know if you agree with that. But part of the strategy that I've been doing with the new site I'm working on is really trying to focus on SEO. So rather than thinking, hey, I'm going to have these amount of people who are always going to tap me for content, it's like, well, if I write an article about a winery in Spain, I want to write a really great article with a lot of SEO intention, so that people would say, oh, okay, 20 minutes from Barcelona, there's this winery that does this, and make it super specific so that in a Google search, it'll come up in, ideally page 1, but if not, really high up. So what do you think about a strategy like that?
Yeah, I mean, SEO is massively important for all of our websites. Literally one of the most satisfying things in the history of, the relatively short history of Vinous, was when I realized that if you typed in Opus 1, and this was going back to in 2013 when we literally first started launching, and you type in Opus 1 and we were the second result behind the Opus 1 website. That was so satisfying and really important. One of the challenges with SEO is that there just aren't that many people searching things like the obscure Spanish wine name, but the cool thing is that therefore you've got a really good chance to be pretty high up on the list, because there's just not that much in-depth content about a lot of these things. But yeah, SEO is important, it's tricky. Lots of inbound links, that's why the multi-platform strategy is often important, because if you're linked to from the likes of Facebook and other places, that really helps you. It's a little boost. But yeah, it's a complex area, but yeah, I think it's profoundly important.
Boy, it's an interesting point about people reading blogs less and less. Is that what you're finding?
Yeah.
I'm finding the same thing. Yeah, who here has been writing a blog for 5 years? Raise your hand. How many have seen your readership go down slightly or somewhat? Raise your hand. I think it is slightly going down. I think it might have a little bit to do with the search engines. Do you remember when you would go to Google and you put in a search phrase and you could choose all or choose news or you could choose blog? That's hidden now. That's buried deep. And Google is not returning a lot of blog posts when you do a news search either, but there's more reasons than that. But I think there's just more media. In particular, there's more social media. People have taken their news gathering and their free time to engage often to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and whatnot, whereas before that, they might have taken it to our blogs. And I think that's the primary reason why we're seeing less readership.
I'm gonna extrapolate on that and talk about two other things. And that is that I believe in addition to what he said, I think there's two other reasons. One is noise. There's just so much more out there nowadays than there was before. Every day we're creating billions of bytes of content out there in every channel. So there's much more noise out there. So you have a lot more competition. And the other thing is engagement. It really is like where that engagement's happening. And so in terms of SEO,
Can you explain when you're talking just so?
okay, so in case you don't know what SEO means, it's search engine optimization. The whole idea behind SEO is that you optimize your site so that Google and Bing and other search engines have the greatest chance of finding you on a particular subject. Okay, so it is important for you to make sure that your blog is search engine optimized. One easy way to do that actually is if you work on WordPress, just get the Yoast plugin, right? Yoast is an SEO plugin. It'll basically guide you through whatever you want to do in terms of SEO. That helps a lot. But there is no substitute for good content, right? Because Google, Bing, they've gotten really smart about how they search and how they crawl these sites and whether they deliver your sites above others. And that has to do with good content, right? The better your content is, the better you're going to rank. There's really no substitute for that. There's other things you could do to make sure that you are kind of checking the boxes, but really there's no substitute for just writing well or good video or voice or what have you.
We have one more question.
I think that good content is excellent, but why I still read Tom's blog all the time is because I'm extremely interested in his very specific content. And I think that's what blogging is. It's an expert like Tom with specific information, because I used to live opposite a place that had graffiti that said land rights for gay whales. And that's how I feel with some blogs. I read it 1 minute they're in Walla Walla, then they're in Spain, then they're talking about this. And I don't believe they're an expert. I want to spend my time reading someone like Tom, who really knows about something very, very detailed that hardly anyone else talks about.
It's very exciting to finally meet my reader. Wow. So you're the one. But speaking of that specific topic and meeting your readers, occasionally I'll post something, say about, wholesalers, okay, and how they're evil. And I'll get a good readership and whatnot. And one of the things I love to do is dig down into WordPress and look at what IPs are coming to my site, So it's always, Comcast, yada yada. But then you get down there and it's wine and spirit wholesalers, Southern Glazers, or TTB and things. I love that so much, And so I don't have a very big audience. I never did have a big audience because I was writing for this very sort of specific industry audience. But I think the audience that I've built is a collection of relatively important people, or at least engaged people in the industry. And I recommend it highly that as you go forward in your blogging career and as you expand your blog, that you think about how you can make your writing and your passion more specific and more niche. Figure out how you can become the champion of Walla Walla, or figure out how you can become the champion of dry rosé, or for those of you who like it, sweet rosé. Be the go-to person for something or other. Being a generalist in today's world is so difficult.
Can I just add something which is not exactly related to that, but just sort of a general thing before we wrap up, which is if you look at sort of business blogs and that sort of thing, a lot of them use sites like Medium and even Huffington Post to some extent is effectively a big blog site now. In wine there's never really been that, and it's something which we've been in the last couple of months or so interested in exploring a little bit potentially. So we've done there's a couple of blogs, and there's a blogger, one called Ellen Clifford, for example, who's become pretty popular. She's got a podcast, that sort of thing, and now we're sort of getting her to post some of her blogs basically on Delectable, and then that gets included in the digest, goes out to 1 million people, that sort of thing. And so this is, I guess, connected to a whole load of the questions earlier. If there is an interesting angle that you have, and if you do want to potentially explore, posting or working with us to have a couple of posts from time to time, on Delectable as a featured item, and then that gets linked obviously to your blog and goes out to a very large audience. I'm willing to explore that basically, which I think is a pretty cool thing, pretty unusual, and it's an open offer.
It really comes down, for me at least, it really comes down to why. Why are you doing what you're doing, right? What is the purpose of your blog? Why are you doing it? Okay, there's some reason why. You may not realize how to answer that question, but you need to do some searching into, okay, why does this blog exist? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Has anybody ever read Simon Sinek? Guys, start with why. Go buy the book tomorrow. Okay, it's an excellent dissertation on why we do what we do. And if you want to make sure that you are reaching the audience you're doing, if your why is just basically, I'm a hobbyist and I just like doing this, fine, that's your why. That's good, then you're reaching your goal, right? But if your why is something else, you need to figure out what that is, and then you need to figure out, okay, how do I make that happen?
Michael, a follow-up to that. After this question, we'll shut it down. I know you and I both have studied. I'm studying the diploma level with WSET, and I know you finished the diploma level. Can you just speak very briefly how important you think getting some type of formal education in wine helps you become a better blogger?
Well, it goes back to the question of expertise, right, and credibility. So you have to have expertise and credibility somehow. You have to prove that some way. Formal education is one way. There are plenty of other ways. If you've worked in a winery for a while, or you've worked in the business for a while, or you worked in restaurants, whatever. But if you want people to trust what you're saying, you need to prove to them why you are a credible source for information, and that's really what it comes down to.
All right, guys, let's give the panel a big round of applause. They did a great job. Thank you very much. And we'll turn it over to you, Alan.
Let me just tell you what's going on, but I want to say too that when we have really interesting panels, I always sit here and take notes on my pad and on my computer, and I did that with this panel. Let's give them another round of applause. But I do want to say, one of the things I wrote down here is, why is Tom so interested in Kim Kardashian? But I'll figure that out later. Here's what's going on this afternoon. At 1:45, which is after lunch, we have the 2 wine discovery sessions. So in the Renaissance room, which is when you go out and turn left, we have Rías Baixas, wines from Spain. And in the Lewis room, which is right on the other side of that wall, we have the Consorzio Lugana DOC, wines from Italy. So that's after lunch. After those 2 sessions, you're going to be right back in here for the keynote speaker. All this is online and on the agenda boards out there. Right now, what you're going to do is go outside where there's a buffet lunch, and you're going to, on your way back in, grab a glass of wine. You're going to grab, just going to grab a glass, and then in here will be wines, and the whole lunch and wines is courtesy of Cascade Valley Wine Country, and they'll be telling you a few things.
Phone? Yeah, you got a problem with that.
Yeah, a new glass, but I'm not giving up this because it tasted so good.
So, okay, what do we do now? Lunch. So, are we coming straight back in here? Yeah, we're eating in here. Like, consecutive minutes? I think there is, let's see what it says. It says lunch is from 12 to 1:30. It didn't say. I would imagine probably about 12:30. I would guess they'll probably give everybody 30 minutes to get in there. I'm just guessing. Yeah. Well, that's good.
Walk, yeah.
I think he's a little opinionated. That just
he is. There's a lot of questions floating around with one blogging dead and all of that, and he was very passionate. Oh, yeah.
No, I like his blog.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I think there's a place for it. Yeah, absolutely.
He's one of the few blogs where you get thousands of comments on anything he writes almost immediately.
And what I like what he said, he's very specific in what he blogs about. And I think that's something, but I think that you need to have something specific in an angle. It's hard to be all over the place.
I can do that. I mean, I can do that too.
Thank you.
Good job, honey.
All right, guys.
See you later.
Okay, well, I'm going to go stand on my...
I'm trying to find
You're going to plug it down here?
Right on the shelf and get it.
Smart, may as well. It's got to be plugged everywhere.
Sit down.
Oh, that's good.
I refuse to give up my Columbia. That's why I got 2 classes. Thank you. Has every table got the same, or what is this?
No.
Wine girl. Wine. The hell is this? Where's my thing? My phone and my So,
What?
but I see a different wine over there. Can I switch? Are we getting more than one per table or just one?
Just one red for now. It'll start us off with a little for everyone, and then we'll come through
Okay,
and
I'm just trying to
probably
get
top
the
off.
system. I'm not
And we're gonna get a little
complaining
white out too.
Okay. All right. I like this label. It makes me think it's crap wine. Maybe it's not. All right. Play the game, Trish.
Yeah,
Play the game.
Yeah. It looks like everybody stepped up. Yeah.
Wine girl. I like it. So, did you put the name of this guy? I didn't put their names. I'd like to figure out what his quality is. Maybe he's got a card. No, it's worth out.
Excuse me.
They said they would do a wine. I love this kind of coffee One year, they put a picnic basket on every table. And you just put it on the picnic basket.
You have to get up. I don't get out there pretty quick.
That looks like a record. Yeah.
Hard road to hoe. It's been a while.
Yeah, so the reason I picked the place for lunch is it's directly across the street. It's the first one. And I feel like,
Well, it's not that far to go to most of them.
well, I feel like we'll be done and we get us free time and do what we want. Go to another one or whatever. And nicest thing is Craig. It's not today.
Well, after lunch, it says from 1 to 3. Open house couple blocks over.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But what does it look like?
Well, no, if we go after we finish lunch, I think we said we have to be back at 1:45.
Oh.
So we have from now till 1:45, I believe.
Oh. There's no
I'll
lunch
double check
presentation?
that. No, I don't think so. It's just lunch and there was a presentation they have us today. There's nothing listed. It's just lunch by this winery.
You said they're putting a spit bottle feel like there's a presentation.
Maybe that's the person who went to my meeting. How are we doing today, everyone? Okay, great.
But I found in one of them.
Oh, I found one of
To
them.
bring back memories. Hey, we need to work on today.
I'm not an expert. I'm just going by the fact that we're wine. We got these grapes actually from the ancient ladies. So we source out
Not bad. That's certainly Candy Valley. Doesn't wow me. That's important. Yeah. I'm not usually a Pinot Noir fan. It's sweet, but not whipping. It's not as bold as like the raw Pinot. That's what that's standard.
Oh, someone got me a bottle of wine. You guys can share mine if you want.
Thank you.
Take a quick photo outside.
Didn't have the cookies when I was out there.